This is Matt Rosen, and this is the Grit Mindset with me, your host, Matt Rosen. The mission of the Grit Mindset is to inspire and empower listeners by delving deep into the journeys of those who have faced significant challenges and emerged stronger. Through authentic conversations, we uncover the mindsets, strategies, and lessons that have propelled these individuals to overcome adversity and achieve success. My aim is to provide actionable insights and real-world advice to help our listeners cultivate their own grit and navigate their personal and professional lives with confidence and resilience.
Hello everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Grit Mindset. I'm your host, Matt Rosen, going solo today. Depending on when you're listening to this will be airing shortly after January Snowmageddon in Dallas. Hopefully a lot of you exhibited grit as you found a warm place to stay, and hopefully the storm won't be as bad as we all think, but I definitely have flashbacks to 2021 when all my pipes were burst, and that was a lot of people had to overcome a lot of grit for all the cold and pipes bursting and things that happened during that time. So hopefully the weather will be nice to us this weekend. We'll see when this thing airs. Well, today I thought we'd talk about a concept that's come up on the show multiple times, and that is grit something you're born with, or is it something you can build? It's the whole nature versus nurture conversation. And is grit something that is forced on you, or is it something you learn, or heck, is it even divine intervention? So there's a lot of research that's been done on this, but it's my belief is not so much to look at that, but just look at some of things in my own life and where grit was really developed for myself. And we'll kind of start there and then go through the stories of some of the guests we've had on the podcast. So for me, growing up, my dad joined the military when I was 2 years old, and so he was a lieutenant in the military. And when you're young in the military, a young officer, you get moved around quite a bit. And so during my 17 years before I left for college, we lived in 7 or 8 different places. So every 2 years, it was picking up and adjusting to a new environment, a new school, a new set of friends. And oftentimes you didn't really keep in touch with those that you left behind. So that was always challenging. Every 2 years you were starting over. And so one of the things during that time you had to do for myself, my siblings, was we had to learn how to connect with people and make friends quickly, because frankly, if you didn't learn how to make friends quickly, you didn't have any friends. And so that experience, I think, led quite a bit into developing a personality to be able to connect with others. Luckily to be able to connect with folks that come on the show and learn their stories, because I had to adapt to people in all walks of life, all different parts of the country, and even over in Germany, which was interesting because I don't speak German. And so as I was reflecting back on grittiness and what it's meant to me, I don't even think I called it grit until the last couple of years, and obviously have learned a lot more about it doing this podcast and having folks on the show and hearing their stories. And I really, truly do believe that more often than not, people are born with the ability to maybe persist or fight through things longer than others, or have a high pain threshold, which I do not. But then a lot of it is the circumstances that you go through. And I think a lot of people get grittier potentially with age or with experience. And so as I was reflecting back on what work experience kind of gave me grit, it's an experience I've kind of touched on and had a number of guests on the show on, was having a paper route. So when I was 14, I was living in Northern Virginia, and the Washington Post was and still is the big paper in that region. And at that point in time, most people subscribed to it. There was no internet. There was no news on your phone. There was just the print that you'd get every morning. And so that was largely delivered by distributors or paper boys and girls, which I became my freshman year of high school. And, I was asked earlier, why a paper route? Well, you had to be 15 or 16, I can't remember what it was, to get a minimum wage job. So there really wasn't any work if you needed money. Now, my motivation for the money was I wanted to buy the coolest new clothes, but given the fact we were living on a captain's salary at the time, if I wanted my own clothes or new and trendy clothes, I had to buy those for myself. And so the only way to do that was either babysitting, mowing lawns, or a paper route. And a paper route was a heck of a lot more consistent. And we've had a number of guests on the Grit Mindset. In fact, I think it was Mark Sinatra that also was a paper boy for the Washington Post. And there's been a few paper delivery folks on the show. But literally, it was very cheap labor. As I go back and do the math, I think I made between $200 and $300 a month. And for the 40 to 60 hours working each month, that probably equated to $2-3 an hour, which is well below the minimum wage at the time. And how that paper route came about was there was actually a kid in the neighborhood who didn't like waking up early anymore. He was kind of a skate punk, a little bit of a stoner, but a cool guy. And he handed me off his paper route when he turned 16, and I was, I think, about to turn 14. And so I picked up that paper route, September, October of my freshman year of high school, and worked it literally for about 2 years. And so every morning what that meant was my distributor would come by the house, throw a bunch of papers somewhere on my driveway. I'd have to unwrap them, put them each with a rubber band, or if it was raining, I'd have to slide them into a waterproof sleeve. And this was Monday through Sunday, so there were really no days off. Occasionally I'd get a friend to deliver the papers if I was going to be gone for a couple of days, but I would say for 365 days, 362 of those was me running that route. So I'd load all those papers up into a knapsack that went on either side of me, and I would literally run the 2 loops of the neighborhood delivering those papers. And so I'd be waking up at 4:45, getting the papers ready, getting them in my bag, running the neighborhood. Depending how heavy they were, I might have to make 2 trips. I can still to this day throw a paper and hit a doorstep from about 70 feet away. There's not much purpose for that or utility in it, but it is kind of fun. And so doing that was a gritty experience, because at the end of each month, I'd have to go door to door. And at the time, I think the papers were about 25 cents, and there's a little extra for the Sunday paper, so it was $9.20. And so I would have to go and collect $9.20 from about 60 to 65 houses in the neighborhood. Sometimes people were home, sometimes they weren't, so I might have to make multiple collections trips. And early on in that experience, I dealt with my first major customer service issue. So there was one guy on the route. I was actually friends with his son. His name was similar to my last name, but I'll leave it out to protect the innocent. And I had gone to collect my $9.20, and my stoner buddy who'd handed me off the paper route had not told me that this gentleman was going to be out of town for 3 days. He just had forgotten, didn't bother. But I delivered those papers, and I paid for them, because at the end of each month, whatever money I collected, I had to pay for all the papers the distributor dropped off at my doorstep. In fact, the only money I actually made was tips. And so I went to go collect from this particular individual, to which he told me, I don't owe you $9.20, I owe you $8.60. So literally he was haggling with me, a 14-year-old kid, about 60 cents. And I said, you know what, this isn't worth a fight. That's fine. I guess I'll just pay for your papers. And I'll tell you, from that moment on, he did not get the best service. When it was raining out, I would gently place the papers in other people's storm doors. I'd throw his on his patio, or sometimes 50 feet from his house, so he'd have to go out in the rain and get it. And then one day, about a year later, he's like, he's like, I woke up early one morning. Everyone else gets their paper nicely inside their door. Why is mine in my yard? I'm like, well, you never tipped me once. You haggled with me over 60 cents. Man, I don't see the need to provide a higher level of service. He's like, well, don't you get paid by the Washington Post? I'm like, dude, I'm 14. I don't even think I'm supposed to be working. I'm working for tips, and I'm not getting any from you. So you think you're going to get your paper nice and dry? Sorry, bud. And I think after that, he started giving me $1 a month. I don't remember, or maybe he gave me a Christmas bonus. But that literally was my first working experience. And I would say I worked a lot of hours for not a lot of money. But it taught me a lot of grit. You had to wake up every morning. People wanted their papers. They'd call my house and be pretty pissed off if their paper wasn't there. I'd have to collect the money, because the distributor would get upset if his money wasn't there at the end of the month. And so as I reflect back on it, I didn't realize I was running my own small business. I thought I was just, making a little extra money so I could buy some cool shirts to wear to school. And so as I reflect on what, grit means to me and how I developed it, it really was a nurture and an environmental thing. And I know my parents pushed me and wanted me to do well in school, but I always wanted to be entrepreneurial and run businesses and work for myself. And so that was my first opportunity to do so. Now, unfortunately, I broke my leg, and my parents had to deliver the paper for a month and a half, 2 months while I was healing. And I would walk around in my full cast and collect the money. And I think that was the best money I made, because I actually wasn't working and my parents were doing the work, and I was collecting the money, and people felt sorry for me. I think thought I was delivering with a broken leg. And so those were the best tips I made. And it was shortly after that they said, hey, you need to stop this paper route. And so it went back to the distributor, but it was a great experience while it lasted. So for those that are out there that are thinking about, how do I get my start? What should my first job be? How do I instill grit in my kids? I really do believe having a tough job, and many people out there have tough jobs, is a good way to get a start, whether it's a newspaper route, which I don't think they do anymore, being a server or a busboy at a restaurant, attending bar, driving delivery, those tough service delivery jobs, being an Uber driver or an Uber Eats delivery. Thank goodness for all those people that do those types of jobs, because without those, I wouldn't be able to get food from wherever I want at midnight. You can learn a lot of grit and determination working for yourself and having to work under duress and tough demands. And it's really through doing things like that you can appreciate when a good opportunity comes along, what that looks like. We talked about could grit come from other places. I had the pleasure of interviewing Charles Haley, who is a great defensive back for the Dallas Cowboys and the San Francisco 49ers. And in his story, he talked about how he was a chubby kid. He got bullied, and then he got baptized in the creek. And out of that, it was like divine intervention. He went from being bullied to being the bully, to being the tough guy. And so was it truly divine inspiration? Was it, kind of that instant in the creek came back a different person? I do think there's some element of a higher power that influences where we go and what we do in life. And it was interesting, in his story to see that he literally arrived there in an instant, where for others it might be years and years of a grueling process. For other guests I had on the show, I had Veronica on, very successful executive here in Dallas, running a large furniture manufacturing company. When she was 8 years old, she was in her grandparents' apartment in war-torn Colombia. Windows were being blasted out. She could have easily crawled up and been in therapy the rest of her life, but instead she decided that she was going to work through those, and she was going to come to America and build a better life for herself. But I know that wasn't easy, being 8 years old and being scared for their lives in Pablo Escobar's war. And so for some of those, I would say that really wasn't an environmental thing versus a self-inflicted grit like I put myself through. I then, think about my kids. I have an older daughter named Taylor. She's 14. We diagnosed her with dyslexia when she was 6. And so for her, school has always been a struggle. And so she's also a competitive dancer. And so dance has been her relief. Most dyslexics are really good at something else. And so for her, it's dance. And when she was 11 years old or in 6th grade, she's going through the middle school transition. Fortunately, she fractured 2 of her vertebrae training for dance and was unable to dance for 6 months. And she was such a tough kid. She was dancing, playing basketball, playing volleyball. She was running up and down the basketball court. And we could tell she wasn't running very fast, and she came to the side of the court and said, "Oh, my back hurts a little bit." I mean, this kid played a full basketball game only to realize she had like 2 stress fractures on her vertebrae and had to take 6 months off. So for Taylor, it's really a mix of nature versus nurture. Dyslexia unfortunately affects a lot of kids, and that's just something she was born with. And then having I would say a season-ending injury, having to come through those things, that kid's going to be able to fight through just about anything she encounters. Meanwhile, my younger one, Peyton, she's kind of sailed through life, and my wife and I joke that something's going to stop her in her tracks. She's going to have to learn grit somewhere. But for now, she's made it 11 years. It's been pretty smooth sailing, straight A's, no dance injuries, and I hope that continues. But I think every one of us in life is going to come upon hard times, and it's really how we handle those hard times that will allow us to be successful or not successful in the future. And one of the things I'm going to talk about in another episode is it's not enough to just work hard. You got to work hard with a purpose and have a goal, and know that what you're doing is taking you to the next place, whether it's your first job, a new career, a health issue, a loss of a loved one. All those are very challenging situations that we all go through in life. And I think those that maybe are not gritty can develop that grit. And going back to really the definition, it's really passion and perseverance over a long extended period of time. And hopefully for those out there, the grit that you've gained was not something forced upon you, but something you chose to take on. For me, I would say I've been pretty blessed, and the gritty situations I've gone through have been more self-inflicted than not. But it's an interesting topic that I continue to think on. How much does nature versus nurture really play a role in grit in our lives? So as we're closing out here, I am interested in taking these discussions beyond just entrepreneurs, but people in a lot of different walks of life. So if you're sitting here listening and thinking, hey, I've got a good story, or I'd like to explore grit on this podcast, would love to have you on a speaker, please reach out via Instagram or the LinkedIn page. And if you're interested in sponsoring the Grit Mindset, would love to talk with you as well. So for this week's episode of the Grit Mindset, this is your host, Matt Rosen, signing off. Stay gritty out there.